Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Demme. I directed and produced with Ilona Hertzberg the film Neil Young, Heart of Gold, this past summer, 2005, down in Nashville, Tennessee. And as soon as I came to understand that there was going to be a significant 10-day rehearsal period built into the process, and that was really going to constitute our pre-production on the movie, I thought to myself, well, in this new world of DVD, home video, bonus features, what could be a greater bonus feature to accompany the film release, the DVD release of our film, than some kind of video journal that would let viewers see what it's actually like when Neil Young puts a show together. So I invited a very gifted young filmmaker that I know named Jimmy Roach, who had done work for me in the art department on Manchurian Candidate, to come down and make his own kind of little fly-on-the-wall movie about Neil and his family of musicians putting this show together. And we wound up with this. We arrived there and I was really nervous because I have always idolized Neil Young, and he's the epitome of cool to me, and I was convinced that shortly after being in his company, he would realize how uncool I was and that everything was going to unravel. So I really committed myself to be as invisible as possible during this phase of the process. And I also realized that here, certainly for these first days, was all about the music and all about Neil and the musicians getting themselves organized and moving forward, and we really needed to be as invisible as possible. It was quite a revelation for me once inside the studio to realize that my job for the next several days was going to be to spend about 12 hours a day listening to Neil Young and his fellow musicians make music. Very, very exciting. There were moments like we have here of Neil demonstrating to Grant Boatwright the kind of power chords he wanted Grant to execute on Neil's famous electric guitar, Old Black, for the power chords in the song No Wonder, which incidentally is the only song in the entire show to actually feature an electric guitar. Everything else is acoustic throughout. I knew that it was going to be very interesting to form a working relationship with Neil Young, and I understood that it was important that Neil kind of lead the charge on that I was going to be the observer, the fly on the wall, and to whatever extent our dialogue emerged, and it would inevitably emerge, I wanted his work to be the motor for that. I didn't want to show up down there with a million questions and a million ideas and what have you. I was anticipating the interesting dynamic of that relationship taking shape, and what would that be like. The other thing was, I knew that I was also going to have to form a relationship with Neil's entire organization, with his crew, with the people that he works with, and on the musician side, all of the musicians, and then also, very significantly, on the technical side. These weren't just a bunch of gifted musicians that Neil had surrounded himself, but rather there was a definite kind of family feeling amongst them. There's a lot of trust and interchange going on all the time, and very rich relationships, and that excited me a lot. Now, Larry Craig, who is Neil's premier guitar technician and a very gifted musician in his own right, has been with Neil for since the dawn of time, and I love to hear Larry rap about all these guitars. He's like a brain surgeon describing the paraphernalia that he's going to use in the next operation.
Well, in here we have Neil's Tweed Deluxe. It's a mid-50s Fender Tweed Deluxe. It's got a little bit different tubes in it, and it runs real hot, so I have fans just blasting into the back of it. And it's really loud. We got it turned up really loud, and Grant plays this guitar. This is Old Black. This is Neil's electric guitar he's had forever. You usually see him playing this guitar. This is the guitar from Rust Never Sleeps. It's got a Firebird pickup right there. Anyway, so what we do, I close it up and I latch it, and so it can just roar away in there, and sounds great on the microphone, but it's not blasting everything out. Here we got Neil's D45. It's a 1968 Brazilian rosewood, one of the very first reissue D45s, and he wrote and recorded Old Man and just so many songs on this. This is the original guitar that is on the recording, and This has been his main acoustic for a long, long time, and lately he has been playing Hank a lot, because Hank's a killer guitar. This is a good one too, though. In '74, I did a bit of a strut job to it, meaning I scalloped the braces to make it sound a little better. Anyhow, this is a real famous guitar. You always see Neil playing this guitar.
Ben Keith there on the left has been a constant in Neil's musical life ever since they did Harvest. And he is just an absolute brilliant genius on every single instrument. In Heart of Gold, his main instruments of choice are the pedal steel guitar, the lap steel guitar, and the dobro. And just watching this guy do it a little bit different every single time throughout the course of the rehearsals and then the filming was one of the constant amazing things. And Ben Keith is so completely relaxed. It looks like he's almost not interested in what he's doing. He's so casual and relaxed and confident. Spooner Oldham, who is a great, great songwriter in his own right with a Muscle Shoals background, has written enormous hits over the years. Is a great guy. And Spooner would arrive every day with a gigantic plastic bag of homegrown organic figs that he would pass out to everybody. And there were lots of jokes about the different kinds of homegrown things that might have been passed out a few decades earlier by musicians coming in. But here we had Spooner's unbelievably great figs that everybody was chowing down on.
D7 with a G instead of an A. One more time, Neil. Call it out. That's a D with a G on top.
So by the time day 2 rolled around, I had survived a day of not being identified as completely uncool. Neil was very generous in letting us hang around on the periphery of things. And he had such an incredibly interesting approach to the way he mustered all the forces together there, because he was, on the one hand, extremely demanding of all the musicians. They work, and they'd no sooner finish a run-through of a song than Neil would go, okay, that goes on the redo list, and they'd go on to the next one. And yet he managed to somehow, while being exacting and unrelenting in his quest for perfection, he also managed to be very kind of generous and humanistic in his approach, not tyrannical, a very compassionate kind of fearless leader. And it was cool to watch him. I feel like I hope I learned a lot of things about leadership from watching how Neil tread those waters. And I also realized for the first time just the enormity of his challenge to get 20 songs perfectly arranged for a concert that was coming up in about a week's time. And one thing I heard Neil say time and again, and I know in Jimmy's video diary here we see a couple of examples of it, his point to the musicians was, you've got to play your parts perfectly, because that's what I need to hear if I'm going to do my part as perfect as possible. And that's intense when you've got as many as, at a certain point, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of people up there on the stage together, making music together.
Neil calls this guitar Hank, and the reason being, it used to belong to Hank Williams.
Well, originally it was Hank Sr.'s. I don't know how he got it. I guess he bought it new. And then it was handed down to Hank Jr., and Hank Jr. traded it to Shot Jackson for some shotguns. And then Tut Taylor, me owned the old-time picking parlor at the same time, so Neil wanted a new guitar, and so I said, go down and look for him, and he looked for him, and then I said, I'll get you the guitar you want if you show me what the sound you want.
Yeah.
And then, so here it is.
Well, Neil recorded, wrote and recorded all the songs on his new CD using this guitar. This is the only acoustic guitar you hear. Well, we have this.
That's called the herringbone inlay around the edges of it right here. And back up until 1947. 47 is when they went from the transitional to regular binding around it. So they just call this model here the herringbone mark because of this herringbone purfling around the edge.
So here's that exacting but compassionate general. And on our filmmaking side of things, I had told Neil that there was a certain song where it comes a time where I wanted to suddenly depart from our fixed camera, very little camera movement approach that would dominate most of the songs, to a very freewheeling camera. And I wanted to put the Steadicam up on stage and move amongst the musicians quite a bit during the filming of that song. Now, Grant Boatwright is a guy that we all fell madly in love with right away. He's there learning his part on this song. And Grant told us stories about how, even as a little boy, he lived in Alabama, and his folks used to drive their car. As soon as his dad got off work on Friday, everyone would pile in their car down in Alabama. They'd drive through the night so they could be up in Nashville to spend the weekend at the Grand Ole Opry. And Grant used to watch the shows, and he'd sneak away and sneak into the back hallways and go up way into the upper rafters of the Ryman and explore around and nose around and listen to shows from places he wasn't supposed to be in. And he knew everything about the Ryman. Grant showed us parts of the Ryman when the first time that the Ryman folks took Neil and I through to kind of give us the tour. Grant showed the Ryman people parts of the Ryman they didn't know existed. Clinton Gregory, we don't have it here in Jimmy's video diary because we kind of got there a little too late with the cameras, but there was this terrifying moment on, I think, the third day of rehearsal when Clinton Gregory came walking into the hallway with his violin in pieces. And he had had a little accident, and his violin had fallen off and smashed into something. So he was out there trying to kind of figure out a way to put it together, and I was running around both trying to find Jimmy Joe to go film this disaster and try to alert the right people on Neil's crew to go out and help put it back together. This was a moment here in It's a Dream where I wanted to do something special with Grant Boatwright. It's a Dream is one of my favorite songs, one of the most moving songs, and I wanted Grant to personify the dreamer. And Neil had talked about wanting Grant to be dressed in a special outfit with a special Stetson hat and a long overcoat that is evoked from the lyrics of the song. And I wanted to take that and kind of run with it and do something kind of as mystical as possible. And at a certain point, Neil caught me talking to Grant a little too much about where he'd be standing. And there's a moment Neil going like, okay, Grant, we'll worry about where you're standing later. You got to learn how to play the part perfectly first. I was like, okay. So I shriveled up and went back into the corner for a little while. But luckily, little moments like that never crossed the line. And I never had that terrifying moment of having Neil Young say, "You're a loser, get out of here. I'm trying to put this thing together." When Ellen Curris started talking about the way she wanted to light these songs, I got very, very excited, even more so than I already was, which was kind of at a fever pitch, to tell you the truth. She wanted to assign a special color to every song so that whatever the emotional content of each specific song was, it would be reflected in the color choice of the lighting on the background and even the lighting on Neil and the musicians. When Neil and I had agreed that we were going to do a concert film around Prairie Wind, it was full speed ahead and all systems are go. And I knew that Prairie Wind, that body of work, would make for a fantastic film all by itself. And then next realization I had was that, wait, it'll be only 55 minutes long. So I went to Neil and said, would you consider doing some kind of encore dimension to the concert so that we can flesh out our running time to a proper feature-length film? And Neil said, sure, but the songs will have to be drawn from my Nashville work, songs I've done in Nashville. And I said, great, I understand, that's perfect. And when he came to me with a list of songs that he was feeling good about doing, I was really thrilled to see that one of my personal favorites, Old King, was on there. Ben came up with the idea that maybe they could do a little rhythm thing to enhance the energy of the piece, and he started teaching the other backups, Gary Pigg and Diana DeWitt and Peggy Young, a little special kind of ham bony hand slap thing. And Neil heard that on one of these rehearsals, and he objected to it. He said, "What the heck is going on back there?" Now, the visualist in me was thinking, oh gosh, I hope he doesn't veto that, because that should look great if they do this fancy hand slap thing. You know, that'll be kind of, that'll look good on film.
Live catfish or something. It's a live catfish jumping around on top of a garbage.
Neil, we can hear him here saying, well, if you're going to do something, you know, it's got to fit in real good. Anyway, cut to the shows, and they wound up doing a very reduced hand slap thing, I guess. I wasn't even aware of it at the time while we were filming. I was focused on other things. And then in the cutting room, when we were doing the final edit of the film, I kept hearing these little clacks and plops on the soundtrack, and I was trying to figure out what was that, kind of like feedback, or what are those noises? And it turns out that they were these rogue hand claps. And I found myself thinking, damn, Neil, right again. His impulse to not have them in there was you know, spot on.
It's Neil's banjo. And it's 1927 Gibson Mastertone ball bearing style. It's got ball bearings underneath and springs underneath the rim. This used to be made out of calf skin, and the old banjo players would open it up, their case in the next town, and the calf skin would be ripped because of the humidity change. So this is designed to expand and contract with the humidity because it's on springs underneath the tone ring. But this, if you notice, it's a 6-string banjo, so it's tuned. We tune it like a guitar. And he plays this on Old King. It sounds kind of like a garbage can. He likes it.
It's a long road behind. It's a long road.
That sounds great. On the CD.
No, we're doing. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, sounds right.
Here we go again now. This is a moment when I find myself thinking, I am getting paid to stand here and watch Neil Young teach power chords to Grant Boatwright while Sweet Pea and Gary Pigg look on. This makes no sense at all. Also, the idea of there he is standing there. Neil Young's playing that guitar as though it's like a spoon that he's getting ready to eat some soup with. He's so casual, and that is, again, Old Black. This guitar that I've heard in concert, you know, over the years when I've gone to see Neil Young and Crazy Horse, or I've seen Neil on tour with Booker T and the MGs. That's like a magic tool there that Grant Boatwright is holding. Grant really wanted to deliver the goods for Neil on this, because he understood that these power chords were the only taste of electric guitar in the entire concert, and he wanted to do them just right. And he knew that I was panting over in the corner and wanting to film them just right. So Grant was feeling all kinds of pressure at a moment like that. And man, when you've seen the film, you can see how he really delivered the goods. So as we approached the conclusion of the time in the rehearsal space and got ready for the big move over to Ryman, I was starting to tense up, because now I knew that, well, we've had our fun here watching Neil get the sound together, and they've made tremendous progress. And now when we move over to the Ryman, it's going to be our turn, and we're going to get in there and we're going to start setting lights and really getting very precise in the staging. And I was really wishing that this phase could have lasted another week or so, not so they could perfect what they were doing, but just so that the fun of being there in that room with Neil and these people could continue, because this was one of the great experiences of life, I'll tell you. We move over to the Ryman Auditorium, and the camera operators and other key members of the crew start to show up, because now suddenly we don't have nearly enough time to decide where we're going to put all these cameras. We've got theoretical ideas, but we don't know how that's going to translate into operable situations once we're actually in the space. We knew that we wanted all these tie-in angles, and in that regard, one day Alona Hertzberg came over to me and said, "Jonathan, I just ordered 2 more cameras and camera crews, because it sounds to me like you've got more places that you want to film from than you've actually got cameras." So that came as a big relief. I wanted to make sure that we had at least 4 cameras on Neil at all times. I wanted to make sure we had at least 2 close-ups of Neil at all times, and 2 at least waist figures showing his guitar.
Okay, go ahead and take it up.
1897, Nashville started having a lot of conventions, so they added the balcony, and the stage was added in 1901 so they could have shows. The church, being non-denominational, had a lot of financial problems back in those days, and so it was mainly a concert hall in the early teens, and of course the Grand Ole Opry came here in 1943 and stayed until March of 1974, 31 years. And I was here a lot in the late 40s, early 50s, and enjoyed the Grand Ole Opry when it was here. Never had any air conditioning and very little heat. If you enjoyed the music, you had a blast.
We were in the Ryman, and that was a big deal because, you know, you can talk about how it's a, you know, there's a magic place, and such a place is the spiritual home of country music, and that sounds cool, but then you walk in and it's true, you can feel it. For us to actually get into a room with that kind of history and that kind of architecture and this kind of material to shoot, it was very, very heady as the cameras started to come out and we started to kind of play around with positions. In this shot, you can see these two, from the days when the Ryman was a church, they could have restricted views. It didn't much matter what was in the way. So these huge pillars were there, and that made a kind of a major problem for us because we knew we had to have a strong audience presence there for Neil and the rest of the musicians to play to. You can't play to cameras. It's never the same. And by the same token, we knew we were going to have to commandeer a lot of the best seats in the house for our cameras. So that, plus the limitations of having these restricted seating situations due to the pillars, was a little anxiety producing, and I found myself spending as much time talking with, especially with Gary Getzman, about you know, where are we going to put people, and you know, engage in a kind of a struggle to serve the cameras and kind of somehow thread the needle to make sure we let enough people in so that the band were getting what they needed.
I saw so long ago. Could she be the one to take me home?
Emmylou showed up there at the Ryman for the first time. She had had some engagement commitments on the road that prevented her from coming to the rehearsal space, and it was incredibly exciting to suddenly have Miss Emmylou Harris show up on stage. And Emmylou Harris, Peggy Young, Diana DeWitt, what a amazing heaven-sent trio of background singers. They're just incredible.